نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد بسم الله. We will begin today Surah Talaq. Surah Talaq Surah Talaq is a Madani Surah, 12 ayats and 2 ruku, means divorce, and it gets this name because the surah discusses rulings of divorce and waiting period, al-iddah, in many verses of the surah. It is also called Surah An-Nisa As-Sughra, meaning the small Surah An-Nisa, because Surah An-Nisa describes many rulings for marriage and divorce, and this Surah Talaq is focused on more of the divorce, rulings around divorce. What is the connection of this surah with the previous surah? So at the end of Surah Taghabun, it is mentioned that there could be enemies among your wives and children. And Surah Talaq mentions the rulings of divorce and rights of women and children in such situations. So essentially what could happen is, because of this relationship, bad relationship between the husband and wives and children, they may enter into a situation of divorce. And then what should happen afterwards? So various rulings of divorce are defined here, along with rights of women and children once divorce has occurred. So a brief synopsis of the surah is that this surah focuses on rulings of divorce and related considerations. It outlines various scenarios for calculating waiting period, iddah. It establishes rulings or alimony and housing during iddah. So what should be paid to the wife and whether she can remain in the house during the waiting period. We're also advised on matters of alimony and breastfeeding postpartum. So again, what are the rights of the children after the divorce has occurred? And if it involves, especially if it involves, let's say, delivery of a child. We see multiple reminders to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding His commands and divine limits, hududullah. And finally, towards the end, it reiterates the mission of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to recite the verses of Allah and bring believers out of darkness into light. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها النبي إذا طلقتم النساء فطلقوهن لعدتهن وأحصوا العدة واتقوا الله ربكم لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة وتلك حدود الله ومن يتعد حدود الله فقد ظلم نفسه لا تدري لعل الله يحدث بعد ذلك أمرا. O Prophet, ﷺ, when you divorce women, divorce them for the commencement of their waiting period and keep count of the waiting period and fear Allah, your Lord. Do not turn them out of their houses, nor should they leave themselves during this period unless they are committing a clear immorality, and those are the limits by Allah. And whoever transgresses the limits of Allah has certainly wronged himself. You know not, perhaps Allah will bring about after that a different matter. So before we get into the details of the surah, let's understand a few concepts that are important. So first of all, marriage is a sacred contract in Islam. And it has been generally preserved, this contract has generally preserved its original form in many religions. So many religions still to this day follow the ceremonial rites or nuptial restrictions and the prescribed procedures for divorce and marriage. So this is such an important constitution of a religion that all these activities to this day are pretty much preserved in other religions as well. Islam elevates the status of marriage from just a civil contract to an act of worship. So the institution of marriage in Islam not only creates a controlled outlet of natural desires, but also establishes a system of mutual rights and obligations essential for proper function of family life. However, similar to other contracts, marriage is conducted with the intention to uphold the terms of relationship, but in unforeseen circumstances, there's a need to terminate the contract. Islam allows for divorce with rules and guidelines so that the separation can be carried out for the welfare of both husband, wife, and the family. So in the first ayah, notice how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the form of Ya ayyuhan Nabi, O Prophet. In other places of Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a slightly different form. Ya ayyuhar Rasul, O Messenger. So Nabi, Prophet, Rasul, Messenger. Imam Qurtubi says that the form of Ya ayyuhan Nabi generally comes when the ruling is applicable to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and rest of the believers. Whereas the form Ya ayyuhar Rasul is used to describe a ruling specific to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that has been his observation looking at different ayats. If they begin with Ya ayyuhan Nabi, then the ruling is not only for Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but has a broader implication on other believers. Versus if it is something that is addressing Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Ya ayyuhar Rasul, it's specific to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here we notice Ya ayyuhan Nabi, so hence it is broader than just Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another thing to note is that the call in the singular form is in the singular format. So Ya ayyuhan Nabi, an-Nabi is in singular form, but the ruling is using plural form. إِذَا طَلَّقْتُمْ. So طَلَّقْتُمْ is a verb in plural form. So it begins with addressing Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in singular form, and yet it turns into a plural form when it talks about divorce to women. So sometimes we know that you can use a plural form in the royal meaning. So to give an honor to a person, you may address them as our, or they may call themselves we. So that is one interpretation, which is Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam here is giving the honor, and hence a plural form is used. Or the other interpretation is that this ruling is not restricted to him, but applies to the rest of the believers as well. Another interpretation of this verse is that the ruling is for believers only. It's as if the verse has the words hidden in it. So, Ya ayyuhan Nabi, qul lil mu'minina idha tallaqtum nisa. So, as if the command to Prophet ﷺ is, O Prophet, say to mu'mineen that when they divorce women. That could be another way to interpret the ayah. So when you get to the first part of the ayah, which is فَطَلِّقُوهُنَّ لِعِدَّتِهِنَّ. So divorce them at a time when the period of iddah may start. So let's focus on the word iddah first. What does iddah mean? Iddah means to count. That's a literal meaning of iddah. In Sharia, iddah means a waiting period prescribed for a divorced woman or a widowed woman before she can marry another person. So before she can marry another man, this is the time she has to wait. That's called iddah. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is advising to give divorce at a time such that there has not been intimacy between husband and wife since the last menstrual period. So that's kind of embedded in it. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَطَلِّقُوا لِعِدَّتِهِنَّ, for the period to start, the idea being give the divorce at a time that does not prolong the waiting period for the woman. So if husband and wife had intimacy, there's a chance that she might get pregnant. She might have to go through the entire pregnancy and then deliver the child at the end. So that's a very extended time for her to be in this state. So the best is as soon as she finishes her menstrual cycle, do not have intimacy and then give divorce. That's the sunnah way of doing it. That's why it comes here, لِعِدَّتِهِنَّ. So give it at a time when the period of iddah may start. And there is a famous incident that is about the same situation where Abdullah bin Umar gave divorce to his wife. And Umar anhu then came to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and told Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam about that. And then he mentioned how Abdullah bin Umar gave the divorce while the wife was during her cycle. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam became angry and commanded Abdullah bin Umar to take his wife back to his house and keep her as wife until she becomes clean from 2 cycles. And then if he still wishes to divorce, he should do it without intimacy. So that hadith actually helps us define a bit more detail here as to what is the sunnah way of giving divorce. The words of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam are recorded in Bukhari. There are many narrations. One of them has words in this has this narration. يراجعها. So this is a command to Abdullah bin Umar. ليراجعها ثم يمسكها حتى تطهر ثم تحيض فتطهر فإن بدا له أن يطلقها فليطلقها طاهرا قبل أن يمسها فتلك العدة كما أمره الله. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded, that he should give divorce in such a way. So the sunnah way would be to give divorce by waiting for a cycle to finish and then do a single divorce. So instead of giving multiple divorce at the same time, give a single divorce without having intimacy. The second part of the ayah is وَأَحْصُوا الْعِدَّةِ, and count the period of iddah. So meaning be mindful of counting the exact days and don't be lax about it. So this is a very important matter. There are many rulings that are impacted by whether a person is still in iddah or not. So do not be careless about counting iddah. When you think about calculating iddah, there are 5 basic scenarios. And for something like this, whether it is a matter of, let's say, divorce or a matter of iddah, it is best to consult an imam in your area just so you get the best advice, because all the details matter. But at a very high level, there are 5 basic scenarios for calculating iddah of a woman. If husband passes away, then the iddah is 4 months and 10 days. If a husband and wife, after getting married, did not have privacy, then there is no iddah. That woman can marry right away. There is no waiting period. That's the second scenario. The third scenario is that the woman is pregnant, then the waiting period, the iddah, will be until the end of delivery. So once the child is delivered, then that will be considered the completion of the iddah or the waiting period. The fourth scenario is that the woman is not menstruating. So it could be minor age, could be menopause, but in either case, there is no cycle in the physiology of the woman at that point. So the iddah at that point is fixed. It is 3 months because you cannot use any other way to determine it. It is 3 months. And the last scenario, which is most common, is the woman is menstruating. Then the iddah will be the end of 3 periods. There is some difference of opinion in this calculation. In the 5th scenario, Imam Abu Hanifa counts it as 3 periods of menses, whereas Imam Shafi'i and other scholars count it as 3 periods of purity. As I mentioned, for certain situations like this, like iddah and divorce, it is best to consult an imam and explain the entire situation. We move on to the other part of the ayah, which is لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة. Do not expel them from their houses. So this verse shows that the residence of divorced women during iddah is due on men. So here Allah do not expel them, meaning keep them in the house. So it is upon men to keep the woman in the house, even though they have divorced the woman, simply because it is still the responsibility of men to give shelter to women at that point. And in that case, it is very clear. It's not a favor by the husband on the wife. It's actually a right, a basic right of the wife. And just like women cannot be expelled from the house during iddah, they should not be leaving the house out of their own will as well. The one exception, as defined in the ayah, is when a woman commits what is called a fahishatun mubayyina, so a clearly shameless act. And there are three interpretations of what constitutes a fahishatun mubayyina. First is that the woman leaves the house on their own. So in this case, the verse is emphasizing the prohibition of such an indecent act of running away from the husband's house. So that's the first interpretation, that woman leaves the house on her own and almost runs away from her husband's house. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is re-emphasizing that this is fahisha mubayyana, and this should not be allowed. This should not be done by the woman. Then the second interpretation is that fahisha mubayyana means adultery. So once it is proven that she is guilty, she will be taken away from the house to implement the prescribed punishment of adultery, and hence she has to leave the house. So that's a second interpretation. And the third one is that she clearly commits shameless acts, and here is referring to using abusive language, either towards the husband or towards husband's family, but she uses abusing language. And in this case, if a divorced woman uses obscene or indecent speech, she can be expelled from the house during iddah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the ayah afterwards, وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. So after describing these rules, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of the importance of the divine limits, hududullah. So hududullah literally means the limits prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and refers to sacred laws set down by Sharia. So exceeding the limits refers to violation of those sacred laws. And the sinner actually by doing so has harmed himself, because violation of the law does not change anything in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sovereignty. It is something that the person has harmed himself by committing a sin, and now he or she is bound to face consequences. لا تدري لعل الله يحدث بعد ذلك أمرا. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is defining one of the wisdoms of of allowing the wife, or keeping the wife in the house. So there's a possibility that after divorcing the wife, circumstances may change. There's a change of heart of the husband, and he may recall all the previous joyous moments living together, and he may also think about how the wife was good in upbringing of the kids, and of all these thoughts that come to him, he may encourage him to retract the divorce. So by seeing the wife in the house, by seeing still the interaction between her and the children, and it may allow him to reflect and change his approach and rethink the situation. And again, Islam promotes that the family does not break, and husband and wife go back and live together. So this is a wisdom of keeping wife in the same house, so it may lead to a reunion between husband and wife. So we should also keep in mind here three main scenarios for living together in case of a divorce. So once a divorce has occurred, there could be three possible outcomes. The first one is if the divorce was revocable, meaning raj'i, and in that case, the husband can retract within the waiting period. So the waiting period has not lapsed yet. The husband can decide to reunite with the wife, and no permission is required from wife and within the waiting period, and there's no need to perform nikah again. But if the iddah has passed, so the waiting period has finished, then new nikah would be required, and a mutual agreement between husband and wife has to exist. So both should be willing to live together again, and then a new nikah will be performed, and they can live as a couple again. So that's the first scenario, that the divorce was revocable, it was raj'i. There's another scenario where the divorce is irrevocable, meaning binding. And then the couple can only live together by renewing the nikah. And again, so mutual agreement is required and they have to go through the nikah again. And the third situation is that, this was the third divorce. So this was ghaliza, meaning it is not possible to reunite after the talaq ghaliza, and pretty much now they cannot live together as couple. They cannot even have nikah again. The only option at that point is what is called halala, meaning the woman then marries some other man and goes through a regular marriage. Again, there's no prearrangement there, and either the second husband passes away or gives divorce of his own will, and then if they want to get together again with the first husband, they could. So those are the three scenarios for an outcome from divorce. So a divorce could lead to reunion without any nikah, without any permission of the wife. Divorce could lead to reunion that requires a new nikah and mutual agreement, or a divorce could lead to impermissibility of nikah again, except through halal. فإذا بلغن أجلهن فأمسكوهن بمعروف أو فارقوهن بمعروف وأشهدوا ذوي عدل منكم أقيموا الشهادة لله ذلكم يوعظ به من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر ومن يتق الله يجعل له مخرجا. And when they have nearly fulfilled their term, either retain them according to acceptable terms or part with them according to acceptable terms, and bring to witness two just men from among you and establish the testimony for the acceptance of Allah. That is instructed to whoever should believe in Allah in the last day, and whoever fears Allah, He will make for him a way out. So the term ajal means term of iddah in this context. And فَأَمْسِكُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أو فارقوهن بالمعروف. So here فأمسكوهن meaning retain them with ma'ruf, and فارقوهن بالمعروف meaning leave them or part with them with ma'ruf. So in both cases, whether after the waiting period, the husband and wife are living together, or the husband is leaving the wife. So in either case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us to be doing it with ma'ruf. So what does ma'ruf mean? Literally, it means a recognized way. It could be a custom, of kindness, whatever is prevalent in the society as a better way to do it. That's ma'ruf. And in Sharia, it means the approved procedure. So whatever is approved in Sharia and Sunnah, that's called ma'ruf. So ma'ruf, way to retain the wife would be to accept her back into nikah. So not to hurt her verbally, physically, or emotionally in the future. So if you decide to keep the marriage, so before the waiting period is finished, you want to do a reunion, then make sure you are kind to her and not remind her of all the, of the past, or do not abuse her, whether that's verbally, physically, or emotionally, by this reunion, but it should be done in a ma'ruf way. Similarly, do not consider this reunion as a favor to her, and do not maintain bitterness from the past. So this is something that you are mutually agreeing, although you are initiating, and you can, without the permission of the wife within the period of iddah, that you can do this reunion, but this is something that you want to now sustain and maintain the relationship forever. On the other hand, if the husband decides to leave the wife in a ma'ruf way, so that would be not to evict her from the house disrespectfully, but after the wedding period is finished, let her leave in a very courteous way. It is recommended and even required in some situations to give her a gift of like a suit of clothes upon her leaving. So this is how Islam defines, how to keep the courtesy and kindness even when you're terminating the contract of marriage. Another recommendation in this verse is to make two witnesses on your action, whether you retain or release the wife. And keep in mind, establishing two witnesses is a mustahab act, but not a compulsory condition. What it helps is in the future, if there is any dispute that arises, whether people were not sure what was the time that, the family or the couple reunited, or what was the time that they were apart, then having those witnesses allows that kind of clarity to be put into that matter, and disputes can be resolved easily. A divorce is a serious action and has a negative impact on the family structure. So it is also important at this point to discuss how divorce is disliked in Islam. And much can be said here, but let's address the situation that is most detrimental and yet very common, unfortunately. So due to misconceptions and generally due to anger, many men give 3 counts of divorce together. By consensus of Ummah, pronouncing 3 divorces simultaneously is prohibited. Narrated by Mahmoud bin Labid in Sunan Nisa'i, that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was told about a man who gave 3 divorces simultaneously to his wife. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam stood up angrily and said, Ayul'abu bi kitabillahi wa ana bayna alhurikum? Is the book of Allah being played with while I'm still among you? So he became really angry by hearing about this man giving 3 divorces to his wife simultaneously. Unfortunately, even though it is prohibited, such utterance causes 3 divorces to be effective immediately. So we should understand, just because something is prohibited does not mean that it does not have an effect. Similar, no different than killing is prohibited, but yet if someone commits murder, that person has passed away, has died. So the effect has happened. So similarly, once someone commits these 3 divorces simultaneously, then the woman gets, then the relationship is no longer there. Divorce is implemented right away. So we should be careful not to let a moment of anger ruin our family and cause harm, which is hard to repair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from such an unpleasant and destructive predicament. Ameen. Towards the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. So the word yattaqi comes from taqwa, and taqwa primarily means to guard or to refrain. And in Islam, it signifies to guard against sins. When it is connected to the word Allah, like in this case, yattaqillah, it is translated to fear Allah, meaning to avoid disobedience of Allah and guard against sins. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that whoever exercises taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create a way out for him. But notice the verse does not mention what will this person be protected against, or what will be this person given ease with. SubhanAllah, by keeping it general and non-specific, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has broadened the blessing of protection to include all difficulties and all hardships of this world and the hereafter that this person will be protected against. Another benefit of taqwa that is mentioned in the next verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises rizq for this person from places where he would not have imagined, from sources that he could not even fathom. So rizq literally means provision, but the broad meaning is anything one needs in the world or the hereafter. So rizq could encompass not only just the food or the wealth that you get or the money for day-to-day living. No, it actually has a very broad meaning. So anything you would need in this world or hereafter could be considered in the word rizq. So whoever exercises taqwa, whoever fears Allah and guards himself against sins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a way out for him and take care of his needs in this world and in the hereafter. So ulama look at this part of the verse and connect it to the context of divorce and derive the meaning that for God-fearing husband and wife who get divorced because of all these, unforeseen situations, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would protect them from the hardship and aftermath of termination of marriage. Let's quickly review ayats 1 to 2. So the sunnah way to divorce is at the completion of a menstrual cycle without intimacy. It is disliked to give more than one divorce simultaneously. Women should not be evicted from the house during the period of iddah, and good manners are to be followed whether marital relationship is kept or terminated. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم.